The silence in the Galactic Council chamber was the kind that pressed against your chest. Captain Min-jun Park stood at the human delegation table, his worn uniform, a stark contrast to the gleaming ceremonial armor worn by representatives from older, more established civilizations. Above them all, projected in the center of the circular chamber, spun a dying world. Viridian 7 looked peaceful from orbit. The mining colony's lights still twinkled across the dark side of the planet like scattered stars, but the red markers surrounding it told a different story. 47 hostile vessels. The Ravagers had come in force. The distress signal was received 6 hours ago, Chairman Velthor announced, his multiple tentacles gesturing at the display. The Arquelian's skin shifted through worried colors. 3,000 civilian souls are trapped on that world. 12 different species. The Ravagers have given them 48 hours to surrender before they begin. Harvesting operations. Park felt his jaw tighten. Harvesting. Such a clean word for what the Ravagers did to their captives. Ambassador Seo-Yoon Kim stood beside him, her face carefully neutral. She had been in diplomatic service for 20 years and knew how to hide her emotions. But Park saw her hands clasped tight behind her back, knuckles probably white. "Our military analysis is complete," High Commander Zarakesh announced. The insectoid Kreshnar clicked her mandibles in what Park had learned was deep distress. Any rescue attempt has a 0.003% probability of success. The Ravager fleet is too large, too well positioned. They have trapped the colony in a perfect kill box. "Then we must negotiate," someone said from across the chamber. Park didn't recognize the species. "The Ravagers don't negotiate," Zarakesh replied sharply. "They conquer or they destroy. There is no middle ground with them." Chairman Velthor's tentacles drooped. "Then we must discuss the tragic but necessary reality. We cannot sacrifice our defense fleets on an impossible mission. The loss of ships and trained personnel would leave our own worlds vulnerable. The mathematics of war are cruel, but they are absolute." Park watched the council members nod. One by one, species that commanded fleets of hundreds or thousands of vessels agreed that 3,000 lives were not worth the risk. The logic was sound. The mathematics were clear. And it made him sick. "There are 200 Kreshnar cubs on that colony," Ambassador Kim said quietly. "Children sent there with their parents for the educational exchange program." High Commander Zarakesh's antennae flattened against her head. "I am aware, Ambassador. Do you think this decision is easy for me? Those are children of my people, but I cannot send my warriors to certain death. The Kreshnar fleet is the shield that protects 30 colony worlds. If I lose ships here, those worlds become vulnerable. I must think of the greater number." The chamber fell silent again. Park understood the logic. He even respected it, in a cold, mathematical way. But understanding something and accepting it were two different things. He cleared his throat. Every eye, stalk, and visual sensor in the chamber turned to him. "The human delegation would like to volunteer for the rescue operation," Park said. The chamber erupted. Not in cheers or applause, but in shocked chittering, buzzing, and what might have been sympathetic groans. Chairman Velthor raised several tentacles for silence. "Captain Park, I appreciate the human spirit. Truly, I do. But your fleet consists of how many vessels?" 7 operational warships, Park replied steadily. 7, Velthor repeated. "Against 47 Ravager vessels, many of which are larger and better armed than your cruisers. Captain, this is not bravery. This is suicide." "Velthor, with respect, Chairman, I didn't ask for your assessment. I volunteered my fleet for a rescue operation." Ambassador Kim stepped forward. "The human government has authorized this action. We understand the risks. Do you?" Zarakesh leaned forward, her compound eyes reflecting the chamber lights. "Do you truly understand? Humanity has only been a spacefaring species for 60 years. You have built your fleet with difficulty, with sacrifice. These 7 ships represent most of your military capability. If you lose them, you lose your ability to defend your own colonies. You could be setting your entire species back decades for a 0.003% chance of success. Park met her gaze. High Commander, those statistics tell you we can't succeed. But they don't tell you we shouldn't try. That is not logic, Captain. That is emotion. Maybe, Park admitted. But there are 3,000 people down there who are going to die terrified and alone if nobody comes. 200 children who will never see their families again. And yes, the math says we'll probably die trying to save them. But we're going anyway. Why? The question came from a delegate Park didn't recognize, genuine confusion in the translated voice. Why would you sacrifice yourselves for strangers? For people who are not even your species? Park thought about the question. He thought about the messages he'd received from his crew when he'd asked for volunteers. Every single member of his 7-ship fleet had stepped forward, not because they were stupid, not because they didn't understand the odds, but because there were some things that mattered more than mathematics. Because someone has to, Park said simply. And because we don't calculate if we can save them. We calculate how we're going to save them. There's a difference. Chairman Velthor's skin shifted through several colors Park had never seen before. The Council cannot support this action. We cannot risk our vessels alongside yours. We're not asking you to, Ambassador Kim replied. We're informing you of our intention as a courtesy. End quote. This is madness, someone muttered. This is humanity, Zarakesh said quietly. There was something in her voice that Park couldn't quite identify. Not quite respect. Not quite pity. Something else. They are young and foolish, and do not yet understand the cold equations of survival. Or maybe we understand something else, Park said. We've only been out here for 60 years. But we've learned one important thing. The galaxy is dark and cold, and full of things that want to kill us. But if we start calculating which lives are worth saving and which aren't, if we start abandoning people because the math doesn't work out, then what exactly are we protecting? What's the point of survival if we lose what makes us worth saving? The chamber was silent again. Chairman Velthor finally spoke. The Council will not stop you, but we will not help you either. You will go alone, and you will almost certainly die alone. Let that be recorded. Recorded and accepted, Ambassador Kim said. Park bowed slightly to the Council, a human gesture of respect that probably meant nothing to most of them. Then he turned and walked toward the exit, Kim beside him. Captain, Zarakesh called out. Park stopped and looked back. The High Commander stood, her wings spreading slightly in what he'd learned was a gesture of acknowledgement among her people. Bring my children home, if you can. We will, Park promised. Or we'll be trying. That, Zarakesh said softly, is what I'm afraid of. Park left the chamber and headed for the docking bay where his fleet waited. 7 ships. 7 crews, who had volunteered knowing they probably wouldn't come back. Behind him, he knew the Council was watching, certain they were witnessing the beginning of humanity's end as a spacefaring civilization. Let them watch, Park thought. Let them see what humans do when someone needs help. The rescue operation was launching in 3 hours. The Bridge of the Times. Indomitable Times hummed with the sound of old machinery doing its best. Captain Park sat in his command chair, studying the tactical display that showed his fleet stretched out in formation. 7 ships. Not much to look at, really. Status report, he called out. Commander Jiwoo Choi looked up from her tactical station. All ships reporting ready, Captain. Weapons at full charge. Shields holding steady at. Well, as steady as they get. Park smiled slightly. The human fleet was built from whatever they could afford or trade for. Their shields were 2 generations behind the Council standard. Their weapons were reliable but short-ranged. Their armor was thick because they couldn't afford the lightweight composites other species used. They were, by any objective measure, outclassed by almost every military in the galaxy. "How long until we reach Viridian 7? Park asked. 6 hours at current speed. Ensign Taeyang Quan reported from communications. The young officer looked nervous but determined. Park knew this was Quan's first real combat mission. "Good. Call all ship captains for a conference. We need to go over the plan." 20 minutes later, the holographic images of his 6 other captains floated around the bridge. Park recognized the mixture of fear and resolve on their faces. They all knew what they were flying into. "I'm not going to waste time pretending this is anything but what it is," Park began. "We're outnumbered, outgunned, and out-teched. If we fight the Ravagers the way they expect us to fight, the way the Council would fight, we'll be dead in the first 10 minutes. So we don't fight fair," Captain Yoon from the Times, Resolute Times, said. She was grinning, which Park took as a good sign. "Exactly. The Ravagers are used to fighting organized Council fleets. Ships that follow proper military doctrine. Ships that fight in formation, that follow predictable attack patterns, that retreat when they're supposed to retreat. We're going to throw all of that out the airlock." Commander Choi brought up a series of tactical scenarios on the display. Human military history is full of smaller forces defeating larger ones through unconventional tactics. Guerrilla warfare. Asymmetric combat. Making the enemy react to us instead of following their plan. "We'll be erratic," Park continued. "Unpredictable. We'll fake retreats, execute wild maneuvers, make them think we're crazy. Because crazy is dangerous. Crazy is something they can't plan for." "What about the evacuation?" Captain Song from the Times, Defiant Times, asked. He was the oldest captain in the fleet, a veteran of the border skirmishes. "Even if we break through, getting 3,000 civilians off the surface will take time. We'll work in phases," Park explained. "The first phase is breaking their blockade. We need to create chaos. Make them pull ships out of position. Once we have a gap, 3 ships will begin evacuation runs, while the other 4 hold the gap open. We've been practicing the maneuvers for the past week," Choi added. "Spinning attacks, false charges, using debris as weapons, things that would make a Council tactician pull their tentacles off in frustration." Park saw his captains nodding. They understood. This wasn't about superior firepower or better technology. This was about being willing to do things their enemy wouldn't expect, wouldn't prepare for, and wouldn't understand until it was too late. "I won't lie to you," Park said quietly. "Some of us probably won't make it back. I asked for volunteers only because I needed people who understood that, and came anyway." "With respect, Captain," Captain Yoon said. "Shut up. We're all here. We all know the score. Let's just focus on saving those people." Park felt something warm in his chest. Pride? Maybe. Or just gratitude that he was serving with people like this. The conference ended, and the captains returned to their ships. Park settled back into his chair and watched the stars stream past on the view screen. Dr. Hana Lee entered the bridge, carrying a datapad. "I've been reviewing the colony's layout," she said. "They have a medical center, but it's going to be overwhelmed if there are casualties. I'm preparing emergency medical kits we can drop with the first shuttles." "Good thinking," Park said. "What about the children? The Kreshnar cubs? They'll be scared, probably terrified. I've loaded some Kreshnar comfort protocols into the medical database, but honestly, I think just being calm and confident will help more than anything." Park nodded. Lee was his chief medical officer, but she was also the closest thing the fleet had to a psychologist. If anyone could keep frightened children calm during an evacuation, it was her. The hours passed slowly. The crew ran drills, checked systems, and prepared for what was coming. Park walked through the ship, talking to his people. A young weapons officer who was writing a letter to her parents. An engineer who was triple-checking the power couplings. A shuttle pilot who was meditating in the small chapel they'd converted from a storage room. They were all so young. Most of them had joined the fleet because they wanted to explore space, to see new worlds, to be part of humanity's great adventure among the stars. They hadn't signed up to die in a hopeless battle against space pirates. But they were here anyway. "Captain," Quan called out. "We're receiving a transmission from the colony. Put it through." The view screen shifted to show a face Park didn't recognize. Feathers, bright eyes, a beak. Seraphim species. He thought. "This is Colony Director Yelena Brightwing," the alien said. "We received word that someone is coming for us. Is this true?" "This is Captain Minjun Park of the human fleet." "Yes, Director." "We're coming. How many ships?" Park hesitated. 7. There was a long pause. 7 ships. Against the Ravager fleet. "Captain, I appreciate the gesture. But it's not a gesture, Director. We're coming to get you out. All of you. I need you to prepare your people for rapid evacuation. Prioritize the children, the injured, and anyone who can't move quickly on their own. You're serious. Completely serious. We'll be there in 4 hours. Have everyone ready to move fast when we open the gap." "Captain Park," Brightwing said slowly, "the Council told us they couldn't help, that it was impossible. Why are you doing this?" Park thought about all the complicated answers he could give. About duty and honor and human stubbornness. But in the end, it was simpler than that. "Because you need help," he said. "That's enough." The transmission ended. Park sat back in his chair and looked at his crew. Choi was running attack simulations. Quan was monitoring Ravager communications. Lee was preparing medical supplies. Everyone was focused, professional, ready. "All hands, this is the captain," Park announced over the ship-wide comm. "We're dropping out of hyperspace in 3 hours. The Ravagers have better ships, better weapons, and better odds. But they don't have our stubbornness. They've never faced an enemy too stupid to know when they're beaten. They're about to learn what that means." Park out. Choi looked up from her console and grinned. "Too stupid to know when we're beaten. I like that." "It has the benefit of being true," Park admitted. The final hours crawled by. Park tried to rest but couldn't. His mind kept running through the plan, looking for flaws, trying to anticipate what could go wrong. Everything could go wrong. That was the problem with desperate plans. They only worked if you got lucky. Finally, the navigation alarm chimed. "Dropping out of hyperspace in 60 seconds, the helmsman announced. "All ships, battle stations," Park ordered. "Weapons hot, shields up. Remember the plan. Hit them hard, hit them weird. And don't give them time to think." The stars stopped streaking and snapped back into focus. And there, hanging in space like a predator over its kill, was the Ravager fleet. 47 ships. Some of them were twice the size of the Time's indomitable asterisk. They were arranged in a perfect blockade formation around Viridian 7. Every approach covered, every angle protected. "Tactical analysis?" Park asked, though he already knew the answer. "We're completely outgunned, sir," Choi reported. "Recommended course of action is immediate retreat." "Noted." "Ignore that recommendation. All ships. Execute opening maneuver Alpha." "Sir, that's—" "I know what it is, Commander. Do it." The Times, indomitable Times, surged forward at full speed, aimed directly at the Ravager flagship. The other 6 human ships scattered in seemingly random directions, their flight paths erratic and unpredictable. On the Ravager flagship, Park imagined alarms were going off. Confused commanders were trying to figure out what the humans were doing. Was this a suicide run? A malfunction? Some kind of trick? They were about to find out. The Times, indomitable Times, screamed toward the Ravager flagship, at full burn. Park watched the distance counter tick down. 5 kilometers. 4. 3. "Captain, they're locking weapons on us," Choi reported, her voice tight. "Hold course. Don't even blink. 2 kilometers. The Ravager flagship filled the view screen now. A massive wedge of armored hull and weapon batteries. Park could see their gun ports opening, tracking his ship. 1 kilometer. Now, Park shouted. Hard spin, full lateral thrust. The Times, indomitable Times, executed a maneuver that no sane captain would attempt. The ship twisted violently, thrusters firing in seemingly random patterns, and spun away from the flagship at the last possible second. The Ravager weapons fired at empty space, where the human ship should have been. But the Times Indomitable's Times wild spin hadn't been random at all. As it spun, its weapons fired in a continuous arc, raking across 3 Ravager destroyers that had been positioned behind their flagship. The shots weren't powerful enough to destroy the larger ships, but they tore through sensors and communication arrays. 3 Ravager ships blind and deaf. Choi crowed. They're falling out of formation. The other human ships were executing their own chaotic maneuvers. The Times, resolute Times, dove under the Ravager blockade line, skimming so close to Viridian 7's atmosphere that her hull started to glow from the friction. Ravager ships tried to track her, but they couldn't predict her course, because she kept changing it in ways that stressed her hull to the breaking point. The Times, defiant Times, flew straight into a cluster of Ravager cruisers, then detonated a spread of proximity mines. The Ravagers scattered, expecting a massive explosion. But the mines were mostly electromagnetic chaff. By the time they realized it was a trick, the Times defiant Times was behind them, targeting their engines. Park watched the tactical display with fierce satisfaction. The Ravager fleet was in chaos. They were used to fighting organized opponents who followed predictable patterns, but the humans weren't following any pattern at all. They were improvising, reacting, doing whatever seemed most effective in the moment. Ravager flagship is trying to reorganize their fleet, Quan reported. They're broadcasting command signals across all frequencies. Jam them, Park ordered. I want their communications so scrambled they can't even order lunch. On it, sir. A Ravager battlecruiser managed to get a weapons lock on the Times Pathfinder Asterisk, one of the smaller human ships. Park watched in horror as the Ravager weapons charged. Pathfinder, break left! He shouted into the comm, but Captain Chen on the Times Pathfinder Times had already seen the danger. His ship didn't break left. Instead, it accelerated directly toward the battlecruiser, then at the last second dumped its entire supply of coolant into space. The super-cold liquid flash froze into a cloud of ice crystals that the battlecruiser flew straight into. Their sensors went blind. Their targeting computers scrambled by the sudden temperature differential. The Times Pathfinder Times slipped past while the battlecruiser spun helplessly, trying to clear its sensors. Crazy brilliant, Choi muttered. Or brilliantly crazy. I can't decide which. The battle had been raging for 8 minutes. The humans had lost no ships, though several were damaged. The Ravagers had lost no ships either, but their formation was broken, their communications disrupted, and their commanders were clearly confused about what they were fighting. Time to open the door, Park said. All ships, converge on Sector 7. Focused fire on the destroyers blocking the evacuation corridor. The 7 human ships, which had been spread across the battlefield in apparent disorder, suddenly converged on a single point in the Ravager blockade. It wasn't the weakest point or the most obvious target. It was simply where Park had decided they needed to be. The Ravagers tried to respond, but their ships were out of position. By the time they started moving to intercept, the human fleet had already concentrated their fire on 3 Ravager destroyers. The focused barrage overwhelmed the destroyers' shields. 2 of them broke off. Their hulls breached. The third tried to hold position, but took a missile from the Times, resolute Times, right through its bridge. Gap is open, Choi announced. Corridor to the planet is clear. Resolute, defiant, Pathfinder, begin evacuation runs, Park ordered. Indomitable, vigilant, guardian, and pioneer will hold this position. Do not let them close this gap. 3 of the human ships peeled off and dove toward Viridian 7. The remaining 4 ships, including Park's Times Indomitable Asterisk, moved to block the corridor. They spread out in a defensive pattern, weapons pointed outward. The Ravagers came at them like a hammer. Multiple contacts inbound, Choi said. 12 ships, heading straight for us. Let them come. Focus fire. One target at a time. The Ravager ships opened fire while still at long range. Their weapons were more powerful than the human guns. And they had more of them. Energy beams and missiles filled the space between the fleets. Shields at 70%. Choi reported as the Times. Indomitable Times shook from impacts. 60%. 50. Hold position, Park said calmly. Return fire. Target the lead cruiser. The 4 human ships concentrated their weapons on a single Ravager cruiser. The enemy ship's shields flickered under the assault, but held. Not enough, Choi growled. We need more firepower. Park had an idea. A stupid, dangerous, wonderful idea. All ships, execute debris pattern Delta. Sir, that pattern is theoretical, Choi protested. We've never actually tested it in combat. Then this will be educational. Execute now. The 4 human ships suddenly broke formation and flew in opposite directions. The Ravagers, thinking the humans were retreating, pressed their attack. But the human ships weren't retreating. They were creating an opportunity. The Times, Indomitable Times, fired every weapon it had at a large piece of space debris, the destroyed remains of an old satellite. The debris exploded into hundreds of fragments. At the same moment, the other 3 human ships fired at their own debris targets. The result was a spreading field of high-velocity fragments between the human ships and the Ravagers. The Ravager cruisers flew straight into it. Their shields could stop directed energy weapons and even missiles, but they weren't designed to handle hundreds of small impacts all at once. Shield generators overloaded. Hull plating cracked. Now! Park shouted. Through the debris field. Full attack. The human ships, which had created the debris field and knew exactly where the safe paths were, charged through it. The Ravagers, blinded and damaged, couldn't respond effectively. The Times, Indomitable Times, fired at point-blank range into a Ravager destroyer, its weapons tearing through the weakened shields and into the hull. The destroyer exploded, adding its own debris to the chaos. Message from the surface, Quan called out. First evacuees are boarding the shuttles. Park allowed himself a small smile. They were actually doing this. Against all odds, against all logic, they were pulling it off. Then the tactical display lit up with new contacts. Oh no, Choi whispered. Park felt his stomach drop. Emerging from behind Viridian 7's moon were 15 more Ravager ships. Reinforcements. Time for them to reach us? Park asked quietly. 28 minutes, at their current speed. Park did the math in his head. The evacuation ships could maybe get 1 load of evacuees off the planet in that time. Maybe 2 if they pushed it. But there were 3,000 people down there. Get me Director Brightwing on the comm, Park said. The Seraphim's face appeared on the screen, feathers ruffled in stress. Captain, we're loading people as fast as we can. But how many can you get on the first run? Maybe 500 if we pack them in tight. Captain, there are children here. Injured people. We can't just... I understand, Director. Do your best. We'll buy you as much time as we can. Park cut the transmission and looked at his tactical officer. Choi, I need options. How do we hold off 15 fresh ships with our 4 damaged ones for long enough to get everyone out? Choi stared at her display, running calculations. We can't, sir. The math doesn't work. Even if we had full shields and weapons, the numbers are too far against us. With our current damage, we have maybe 10 minutes before they overwhelm our position. Park nodded slowly. He'd known that would be the answer, but he'd needed to hear it said out loud. Then we need to change the equation, he said. We need something they won't expect. Something so crazy they won't know how to respond. What did you have in mind, sir? Park looked at the tactical display. At the planet below. At the Ravager reinforcements approaching. At his 3 ships running evacuation duty. An idea started to form. A terrible, desperate, absolutely insane idea. I'm going to need you to trust me, Park said. And you're probably going to think I've lost my mind. Choi looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. Sir, I've thought that since the moment we left Council space. What's the plan? Quote, Park leaned forward in his chair and started giving orders. With each command, Choi's eyes got wider. By the time he finished, she was staring at him like he'd grown a second head. That's suicide, she said flatly. That's what they said about this whole mission, Park replied. But we're still here. This is different. This is the only way to save those people. You see another option? Choi looked at her tactical display, ran the numbers again, and slumped in her chair. No, sir. I don't. Then we do it my way. Send the orders. As Choi transmitted his insane plan to the other ships, Park looked out at the stars and the approaching Ravager reinforcements. Somewhere down on that planet, 3,000 people were desperately hoping someone would save them. Well, Park thought, we're someone, and we're not done yet. The surface of Viridian 7 was chaos. Dr. Hana Lee stood in the colony's main plaza, coordinating the evacuation with a datapad in one hand and a medical scanner in the other. Around her, thousands of civilians rushed toward the landing pads where human shuttles were touching down in rapid succession. Keep moving. Families with children to the front, she called out. If you can walk, help someone who can't. A young Kreshnar cub stumbled, his 6 legs tangling in panic. Lee scooped him up without thinking, her arms barely managing to hold his insectoid body. It's okay, little one, she said softly. We're getting you out of here. The cub's mandibles clicked in distress. Where's my mother? I can't find my mother. We'll find her, I promise. Lee carried the cub toward the nearest transport, where a human loadmaster was directing the flow of evacuees. The shuttle was already packed beyond capacity. Civilians pressed together in the cargo bay. One more, Lee said, handing over the cub. He's separated from his family. The loadmaster took the young Kreshnar gently. We'll keep him safe, Doc. You better get to the next shuttle. Captain Park says we've got maybe 2 more runs before things get hot. Lee nodded and ran back toward the colony center. The plaza was starting to thin out as the first wave of evacuees boarded the shuttles. But there were still so many people waiting. Too many. Dr. Lee. Director Bright Wing landed beside her. Wings spread. The Ravager ground forces are approaching the perimeter. Our defense teams can hold them for maybe 20 minutes. How many people are still waiting? At least 2,000. And we're having trouble finding all the Kreshnar cubs. They scattered when the attack started, went into hiding. Their instinct when scared is to find small, dark spaces. Lee's stomach twisted. 2,000 people. And somewhere in this colony, frightened children were hiding in places where no one might think to look. I need a team, Lee said. People who know the colony layout. We have to search every maintenance tunnel, every storage room, every place a scared child might hide. I'll organize it, Brightwing said. But, Doctor... I know, but we're not leaving children behind. Lee organized search teams quickly. Volunteers, mostly colony workers who knew every corner of the facility. They spread out with scanners and communicators, calling out in different languages, trying to coax hidden children from their hiding spots. Lee found herself in the education center, moving through classrooms that had been abandoned in panic. Drawings covered the walls. Small desks sat in neat rows. It looked like any school, anywhere in the galaxy. Her scanner beeped. Life signs, small ones, behind a storage cabinet in the corner. Lee knelt down and peered into the gap. 4 sets of compound eyes stared back at her. Hey there, she said softly. My name is... Hana. I'm here to help. The Kreshnar cubs clicked nervously. The largest one, probably the oldest, spoke in halting galactic standard. Are you from the sky? The bad people from the sky? No, sweetie. I'm from the good people from the sky. We came to take you home. Promise? Lee felt tears pricking her eyes. I promise. But we have to go now, okay? Can you come out? The cubs hesitated, then slowly crawled out from behind the cabinet. Lee counted 4 of them. All young. All terrified. She activated her comm, found 4 cubs in the education center, bringing them to landing pad 3. Copy that, Doctor. Hurry. We're getting reports of Ravager troops in the outer sectors. Lee led the cubs through the corridors, moving as fast as their small legs could manage. The sound of weapons fire echoed in the distance, getting closer. They reached the landing pad just as another shuttle was touching down. Lee counted the remaining civilians. Still, hundreds of them. The math was brutal. There wasn't enough time. There weren't enough shuttles. A massive explosion shook the ground. Lee looked up to see smoke rising from the perimeter wall. Ravagers have breached the outer defense, someone shouted. Lee got the 4 cubs onto the shuttle, watching as it lifted off. The loadmaster was right. This might be the last run they could make before the Ravagers overran the colony. Her comm crackled. All personnel. This is Captain Park. We have a situation. Lee activated her comm. What kind of situation? Captain, the kind where I need to make a choice between saving the people already evacuated and trying to get the rest of you out. Ravager reinforcements are arriving. We can't hold them much longer. Well, no. No's long. Revan 17. We can't hold them much longer. How long do we have? There was a pause. 10 minutes. Maybe 15. If we do something very stupid. Lee looked at the civilians still waiting. Families huddled together. Injured people being supported by friends. And somewhere in the colony, possibly more children still hiding. Captain, we need more time. Doctor, if we stay, I know what happens if you stay. But there are 2,000 people here who will die if you leave. Children, Captain. We're still finding children. She heard Park take a deep breath over the comm. Understood. We'll buy you what time we can. But Doctor, when I give the word, you evacuate. No arguments. That's an order. Yes, sir. The comm went silent. Lee turned to find Director Brightwing beside her. That man is going to get himself killed trying to save us, the Seraphim said quietly. Probably, Lee agreed. So we better make it count. How many more cubs are we missing? At least 30. Maybe more. 30 children. Still hiding in the ruins of their safe haven, terrified of the monsters that had come from the sky. Lee felt a fierce determination settle over her. Then we find them. All of them. She organized the remaining search teams, directing them to areas they hadn't checked yet. The weapons fire was getting closer. She could hear the distinctive sound of Ravager weapons, their energy beams making a terrible shrieking sound as they tore through the air. Lee found herself in the residential section, moving through abandoned apartments. Her scanner led her to a small bathroom, where 3 more cubs were hiding in the bathtub, covered with towels. Found 3 more, she reported. Doctor, you need to return to the landing pads, a voice came back. The Ravagers are in the colony. We're falling back to a defensive perimeter around the pads. Not without these cubs. Lee gathered the children and started back, but a blast tore through the corridor ahead of her. Debris rained down, blocking the path. She could hear Ravager troops on the other side, their guttural commands echoing through the smoke. Change of route, she muttered, turning and leading the cubs down a maintenance corridor. Her scanner showed another path to the landing pads. But it would take them through the lower levels. The cubs were crying now, their clicks and chirps conveying pure terror. It's okay. We're going to make it. Just stay close to me. They emerged in the lower plaza just as a human defensive team was setting up barricades. A sergeant with a rifle saw Lee and waved her over. Doc, what are you doing here? This area is about to get very hot. Taking a shortcut, Lee said, guiding the cubs past the barricade. How bad is it? Bad. Captain Park is doing something insane up there to buy us time. But the Ravagers are pressing hard. We're down to one landing pad still operational. Lee reached the pad to find a scene of organized chaos. One shuttle was loading the last evacuees, while another was landing. She counted heads quickly. Maybe 500 people still waiting. Dr. Lee. It was one of her search team volunteers. We found the rest of the cubs. 27 of them, hiding in the utility tunnels. Lee felt a wave of relief. All accounted for. All the children were safe. Get them on the next shuttle, she ordered. Priority loading. The ground shook again, harder this time. Lee looked up to see a massive explosion in the sky. Something big had just died up there. Her comm activated. It was Captain Park. But his voice was strained, pain evident in every word. Dr. Lee, we're out of time. The Indomitable is hit bad. We're coming down. Coming down? Captain, what does that mean? It means exactly what it sounds like. We're making atmospheric entry. We can't fight anymore. But we can land in the colony and load people directly into our cargo bays. It'll be faster than shuttles. Captain, the Indomitable isn't designed for atmospheric flight. You'll tear yourself apart. Probably. But it'll get everyone out in one trip. Maybe, if we're lucky. Lee watched in horror and awe as a streak of fire appeared in the sky. The Times. Indomitable Asterisk, a ship built for space combat, was forcing itself through the atmosphere like a meteor. She could see pieces breaking off, ablative armor burning away. But the ship kept coming. It hit the ground hard, skidding across the colony's landing field and tearing up the ground. Sparks flew. Metal screamed. But the ship held together. A ramp dropped, and she could see Park himself standing there, blood running down his face from a head wound, but still on his feet. Everyone on board, now, he shouted. The remaining civilians rushed toward the ship. Lee helped organize the flow, making sure the children got on first, then the injured, then everyone else. The cargo bays were enormous, designed to carry equipment and supplies. They packed in civilians like cargo, finding space wherever they could. Doctor, we're loaded, someone called. Wait. Lee did a final count. Everyone was accounted for. Except, where was she? Dr. Lee, get on the ship. Park shouted from the ramp. One more sweep. I need to. Now, Doctor. That's an order. Lee ran toward the ship. Behind her, she could hear Ravager troops entering the landing area. Energy beams cut through the air. The human defensive team returned fire, buying precious seconds. She reached the ramp and stumbled aboard. Park caught her, steadying her with a grip that was surprisingly strong for someone who looked like he'd been through a meat grinder. Everyone on? He asked. Everyone, Lee confirmed. Then let's get out of here. Park slapped a control panel. All ships, this is Park. We're loaded. Punch out. The Times Indomitable's Times engines roared to life. The ship shook violently as it tried to lift off with far more weight than it was designed to carry from a planetary surface. Come on, Park whispered. Come on, you beautiful, stubborn piece of junk. The ship lifted, slowly, agonizingly. But it lifted. Lee found herself standing next to a group of Kreshnar cubs. The one she'd found first, the one who'd been looking for his mother, was among them. He'd found her. They were huddled together, her mandibles stroking his head in comfort. We made it, Lee whispered. Then the tactical display lit up. The Ravager reinforcements had arrived, and they were right above them. The Times, Indomitable Times, climbed through Viridian 7's atmosphere, like a wounded bird. Every meter of altitude, a victory against physics and common sense. Park held onto a support rail as the ship shook, the frame groaning under impossible stress. Hull integrity, at 40%. Commander Choi reported from the auxiliary bridge station they'd rigged in the cargo bay. Shields are barely holding. And Captain? We have 15 Ravager ships in orbit waiting for us. Park looked around the cargo bay. It was packed with civilians. Families pressed together. Children holding tight to their parents. The Kreshnar cubs clustered in groups, their chittering nervous but quieter now that they were moving away from danger. 3,000 lives. That's what they'd come for. That's what they'd gotten. Where are our other ships? Park asked. The Resolute, Defiant, and Pathfinder made it to orbit. They're holding position, waiting for us. The Vigilant, Guardian, and Pioneer are still in atmosphere, providing cover. Tell all ships to run, Park said. Full speed to the rally point. Don't wait for us, sir. That's an order, Commander. Get those civilians to safety. Choi hesitated, then nodded, and transmitted the order. Park watched the tactical display as 3 of his ships broke orbit and jumped to hyperspace. At least some of them would make it home. The Times. Indomitable Times broke through the upper atmosphere and into space. Immediately, targeting locks lit up across the display. All 15 Ravager reinforcement ships had them painted. They're hailing us, Ensign Kwan said, demanding our surrender. Tell them, Park paused. What do you say to an enemy that has you dead to rights? That's about to kill 3,000 innocent people because they happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time? No. Not while he still had cards to play. Tell them to go to hell, Park said. And prepare to execute final protocol. Choi stared at him. Sir, that protocol is... I know what it is. Do it. The final protocol had a simple premise. If the Times, Indomitable Times, was going down, it was going to take something with it. The ship's course adjusted, aiming directly at the largest Ravager vessel. The command ship, coordinating their fleet. Ramming speed, Park ordered. All power to forward shields. Everyone, brace for impact. The Times. Indomitable Times accelerated. Every damage system pushed beyond its limits. The Ravager command ship started to move, but it was too big, too slow, to dodge completely. 10 seconds to impact. Choi counted down. 9. 8. Park looked at the frightened faces around him. He'd promised to save them. He was about to break that promise in the most spectacular way possible. 7. 6. Dr. Lee had her arms around a group of children, shielding them with her body. She met Park's eyes and nodded once. She understood. They'd done everything they could. 5. 4. The Ravager ship's weapons opened fire. But the Times, Indomitable's Times forward shields, overcharged to the breaking point, held just long enough. 3. 2. Park's hand hovered over the emergency release for the escape pods. There were enough for maybe 100 people. Not nearly enough. But maybe, some, could survive. 1. Contact, Choi shouted. Multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. Reading. Oh my God. The tactical display lit up with new signatures. Dozens of them. Ships from across the galaxy. Kreshnar battlecruisers. Arquelian carriers. Even ships from species Park didn't recognize. The Galactic Concil fleet had arrived. The lead ship, a massive Kreshnar dreadnought, opened fire on the Ravager vessels. Not warning shots. Full battle spread. The Ravagers, caught between the humans and the Council fleet, tried to scatter. All Ravager ships. This is High Commander Zara Kesh of the Kreshnar Armada, a voice boomed across all frequencies. You have attacked a colony under Council protection and threatened the rescue vessels of our allies. Surrender immediately, or be destroyed. The Ravagers didn't surrender. They tried to fight. It lasted approximately 3 minutes. Park stood in stunned silence as the Council fleet systematically dismantled the Ravager forces. Ships that had terrorized the colony, that had nearly killed everyone on the Times, Indomitable Asterisk, were torn apart by overwhelming firepower. Why? Park whispered. They said they wouldn't help. Incoming transmission, Kwan said. It's the High Commander. Zarakesh's face appeared on the screen. Captain Park, please adjust your course. Your ship is about to ram my flagship, and while I appreciate the enthusiasm, It would be inconvenient. Park blinked, then started laughing. He couldn't help it. The stress, the fear, the absolute insanity of the past hours all came pouring out as laughter. Adjusting course, he managed. Commander, can you explain what you're doing here? The Council said. The Council said we would not help, Zarakesh interrupted. And officially, we did not. But I am not the Council. I am a mother whose children you just saved. Her mandibles clicked softly. And I am not alone. When word spread of what you were attempting, when we understood that humans would sacrifice everything to save strangers, volunteers from across the galaxy demanded to join the rescue. On the tactical display, Park saw the truth of her words. The Council fleet was made up of volunteers, individual ships, independent captains, people who had decided that some things mattered more than official policy. We tried to stop you from arriving too soon, Park said quietly. We didn't want to risk Council ships. We know. Your suicidal ram attack was meant to destroy the Ravager command ship and create chaos so your other ships could escape with the evacuees. It was very human of you. There was warmth in Zarakesh's voice. But you're not alone anymore. Captain Park, you have never been alone. We were simply too afraid to admit we needed someone to remind us of that. The transmission ended. Park looked around the cargo bay at the 3,000 faces staring at him. Some were crying. Some were smiling. All of them were alive. Status of our fleet? He asked Choi. 4 ships, operational and safe, including us. We lost the Vigilant, Guardian, and Pioneer. They stayed behind to cover the evacuation and didn't make it out before the Ravagers overwhelmed them. Park felt the loss like a physical blow. 3 ships, 3 crews, people who had volunteered knowing they might not come back. Get me their crew manifests, Park said quietly. I need to know their names. All of them. Yes, sir. Dr. Lee made her way through the crowd to Park's side. She was covered in dust and had a cut on her forehead, but she was smiling. We did it, she said. Everyone accounted for. All 3,000 civilians. All 200 Kreshnar cubs. Everyone. Park nodded slowly. They knew, Lee said softly. They knew what they were doing. And they did it anyway. That's what makes it matter. The Times, indomitable Times, limped toward the Council fleet, which formed an honor escort around the battered human ships. As they prepared for the jump to hyperspace, Park allowed himself to finally sit down. Every muscle in his body hurt. His head wound was still bleeding. Against all odds, against all logic, they'd saved everyone. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Council chamber was packed. Park sat at the human delegation table with Ambassador Kim, both of them in fresh uniforms. Park's head was still bandaged, and he was using a cane to walk. But he'd insisted on being here. Chairman Velthor stood at the center podium, his tentacles spread wide. We are here to discuss the Viridian 7 incident and its aftermath, he began. The humans undertook an unauthorized rescue mission with a statistical probability of success near 0. The Council expected to mourn the loss of the human fleet. Instead, we find ourselves reconsidering everything we thought we knew about acceptable risk. Park watched as the chairman's skin shifted through contemplative colors. 3,000 lives saved. 0 civilian casualties. The humans lost 3 ships and their crews, approximately 400 personnel. By any mathematical analysis, this was a disaster. By any moral analysis, this was a triumph. High Commander Zarakesh stood. The Kreshnar government wishes to formally thank the human fleet for the rescue of our children. 200 cubs returned safely to their families. There is no currency in the galaxy that can repay this debt. She turned to face Park directly. Captain Minjun Park. The Kreshnar Armada hereby grants humanity access to our advanced shield technology and weapon systems. We will assist in rebuilding your fleet with ships worthy of the courage you have shown. Murmurs spread through the chamber. The Kreshner shield technology was among the best in the galaxy. This was an extraordinary gift. Other species began to stand. The Arquelians offered engine technology. The Seraphim offered medical training and supplies. One by one, species that had watched humanity volunteer for a suicide mission pledged their support. The human fleet will be rebuilt, Velthor announced. Stronger than before. Because the galaxy has learned something important. We have grown cautious. We calculate risk and probability. We make the logical choice. But sometimes, the logical choice is not the right choice. Park stood, leaning on his cane. With respect, Chairman, we didn't do this to get rewards. We did it because people needed help. We know, Velthor said softly. That is precisely why you deserve them. The session ended. But Park was immediately surrounded by delegates wanting to speak with him. He shook hands, appendages, and tentacles, until Ambassador Kim finally rescued him. You need to rest, she said. You're still recovering. I need to visit the memorial, Park replied. They made their way to the new monument that had been erected in the station's garden. It was a simple column of black stone with 400 names carved into it. The crews of the Vigilant, Guardian, and Pioneer. People who had died doing what they believed was right. Park stood before the memorial for a long time, reading the names. Junior officers and veteran spacers, engineers and gunners, people from Earth, Mars, the orbital stations. All of them had volunteered. All of them had known the risks. Captain Park? A small voice said. Park turned to see a young Kreshnar standing nearby. It took him a moment to recognize Ziktal, the cub Dr. Lee had found in the first hiding place. Hello, Ziktal. How are you doing? I'm good. I'm back with my family. We're going home tomorrow. The cub moved closer. I wanted to thank you for saving us. Park knelt down, ignoring the protest from his injured leg. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. My mother said you came even though everyone said you would die. She said humans do that. That you help people even when it's scary. Well, it was pretty scary, Park admitted. I'm learning Korean, Ziktal said proudly. When I grow up, I want to serve on a human ship. I want to be brave like you. Park felt his throat tighten. You're already brave, Ziktal. You survived when everything was terrible. That takes real courage. The young Kreshnar clicked his mandibles happily, then ran back to his waiting family. Park watched them go. A family reunited because of what his crews had done. Commander Choi found him there an hour later, still standing before the memorial. The new ships are being built, she said. 5 replacements for the ones we lost, plus 2 additional cruisers. They're using the best technology from across the Council. We're going to have the most advanced small fleet in the galaxy. Good, Park said. We'll need them. Planning another impossible rescue already, sir? Park smiled. Always, Commander. Someone has to. They stood together in silence, reading the names of the dead. Heroes who would never know how much their sacrifice had changed the galaxy, how their willingness to die for strangers had reminded an entire civilization what courage looked like. The Council is calling what we did the Viridian Miracle, Choi said. They're writing new protocols about acceptable risk and moral obligations. We changed their whole military doctrine. Good, Park said again. Maybe next time someone needs help, they won't wait to see if the math works out first. Sir, I have to ask. When we were about to ram that Ravager ship, were you actually going to do it? Park thought about the question. He remembered the moment, the decision, the 3,000 lives behind him, and certain death ahead. Yes, he said simply. Because they called it a suicide mission. But we just called it a rescue operation. And that's what makes all the difference. End. Choi nodded, understanding. They stood before the memorial a while longer, then turned and walked back toward the human delegation quarters. Behind them, the names of 400 heroes gleamed in the starlight. A permanent reminder of the day humanity taught the galaxy what it really meant. To refuse, to give up. The Council had called it impossible. The humans had called it Tuesday. And somewhere in the galaxy, 3,000 saved lives went on living. Free because a group of stubborn humans had decided that the right thing to do was worth any cost. That was the human way. That was what they called victory.